Hi, welcome to what is literally my corner of the world. This is our first online class. I expect this to only take about 10 or 12 minutes. And today, whatever time it is when you're watching, I want to talk to you about a man named Kenneth Burke. Now, you're communication studies majors, and you're basically in a class on rhetorical analysis. And when you graduate with a degree in communication, having studied rhetorical analysis a little bit, I think it's important that you have at least heard of Kenneth Burke. Kenneth Burke, who's dead now, was a monster in rhetorical analysis during the 20th century. A textbook author by the name of M. Griffin, who wrote a theory textbook, had this to say about Kenneth Burke. He said, perhaps the foremost rhetorician of the 20th century. Burke wrote about rhetoric. Other rhetoricians write about Burke. So according to Griffin, Burke was the only person really doing a lot of original thinking and analysis on rhetorical analysis. All the other people who were pursuing rhetoric simply wrote about what Burke had to say and argued about whether it was right or not. He was really a monster in the field of communication studies, especially rhetorical analysis. One of the things that's fascinating about him is that he never went to college, or very little. He went for a quarter or a semester somewhere and then quit. But he read everything. Just absolutely everything in terms of philosophy and other rhetorical kinds of things, and he was able to put it all together and come up with his own ideas about human beings. A very profound thinker. He ended up on faculty at many serious universities, highly respected. He died in 1993. He was born in 1897. So he was really something, and we're going to talk a little bit about his view of rhetoric. Now, he wrote a lot of books, and we can't even begin to talk about in any kind of depth what he did, but I want to talk about his basic idea of rhetoric, which is essentially, like Aristotle's and many other people's, rhetoric is persuasion. One of his primary ideas in the idea of persuasion and rhetoric is that in order to persuade the audience, there must be identification. That's a really major term for Burke. That the speaker and the audience have to have some common ground. If there's going to be any persuasion taking place, the audience has to feel that the speaker shares something with them. Burke called this identification. And he believed that to be a successful speaker persuasively, you have to find a way to establish that with your audience. Burke believed that language was really important to the human condition, that we thought and perceive the world through our language, not unlike the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that our language shapes the way we see things. And he believed that if that's true, then examining a person's language gives you insight into who they are and how they see things, just by looking at the language that they used. And that was his fundamental idea. From that, he created this whole idea of what he called dramatism. And that's this idea that, like Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage, and everyone are simply players upon it. And Burke, who was quite well read in Shakespeare, believed that to be true, and formulated a whole theory called dramatism. And he believed that through this analytical process, one could look at a speaker and determine his motives, his or her motives. That was another piece of Burke's primary idea, was that motives lie behind everything that we do. We do things because we're motivated to do them. And his goal was to be able to look at some rhetoric, analyze it, and determine what were the motives of this person. How does this person see the world? And he created a process for doing that. Again, we're not going to have time to get into that whole process, but there is a basic piece of it that I want you to be familiar with. You may or you may not use it in your analyses of speeches from this point forward. You're not required to. But it may show up for you. You may begin to see some of this. And that's this, what Burke called the pentad. He believed that this whole storytelling, this whole dramatism, the drama, was based on 5 different pieces. Those 5 pieces are the act. In other words, as the speaker gets up to give a speech, he or she tells a story, essentially. And in that speech, the speaker is addressing some sort of action. We may talk about many actions, but within there are actions, and one particular one that will stand out. And that's what he called the act. That's the first piece of the pentad. Second is the scene. As the speaker is describing this act, what's the scene around the act? What's the context of this act, what exactly was taking place around it. The third piece was the agent. Who is doing the act? We're not talking about the speaker, we're talking about as the speaker tells the story, who is doing the act in the story. It may be the speaker, him or herself, if the subject happens to be the behavior of the speaker, but oftentimes it is not. The fourth piece is agency. That's what did the agent use to perform the act? What sort of tools did he or she make use of in order to have the act performed? And the last is purpose. What was the purpose? As the speaker speaks, he or she will indicate some sort of purpose as to why the agent performed this act. So again, as you look at a piece of rhetoric, you're looking at this story that's been told by the speaker. Burke would have us take a look and say, who's doing the acting in the story? What's the scene in which this action is taking place? What is the act itself? What's the agency, or what are the tools that were used to create the act? And what does the speaker say was the purpose for the act? And that's an important piece of this when you're looking at this way. Remember that this is not about the speaker, unless the speaker happens to be talking about him or herself. But when the act is not the speech. The agent is not the speaker. The scene is not the scene where the speech takes place. You're looking at the speech itself and seeing what the speaker is talking about. Who is the agent in the story? What is the act that they did? What is the scene where that took place? You got to keep it in the story. It's not about the speech. For instance, when you get to purpose, don't talk about why the speaker is giving this speech. The purpose that Burke would have us look for is what's the purpose for the action that the agent is taking within the story that the speaker is telling.